Remember those summer grilling recipes no one makes anymore? They filled backyards with smoky, simple joys every cookout. How did we let those flavors fade? Hawaiian pineapple and Spam skewers were basically a tropical vacation on a stick right in your backyard without the plane ticket or hotel bill. Back when backyard cookouts were an event that stretched into the evening with citronella candles buzzing in the background, these skewers showed up everywhere. Sweet pineapple chunks from the can, Spam cubes straight from the pantry, and a grill sizzling away. That was the formula. It was quirky, cheap, and had that fun retro Hawaiian craze vibe that took off across the United States during the 50s and 60s. Spam was practically a celebrity back then, not the punchline it became later on. Families loved these because they were easy, looked fancy, and added a tropical flair to the otherwise standard hot dogs and hamburgers lineup. Plus, they fit perfectly with the whole tiki party trend that swept America. You could make a tray of these with minimal effort, and suddenly you looked like the world's most exotic grill master. It was pure backyard cookout magic. But somehow, between microwave dinners and frozen meals, we just stopped making them. When was the last time you saw someone grill Spam on purpose? Foil packet potatoes with bacon bits were the unsung hero of backyard cookouts, quietly sitting on the grill, minding their own business, and coming out perfectly golden and steamy every single time. Back in the day, everyone knew this trick. Sliced potatoes wrapped in foil with bacon and onions, tossed on the grill while you mingled. It was budget-friendly, delicious, and just made sense when feeding a crowd. There was no babysitting needed. The foil did all the work. The potatoes cooked in their own steam, soaking up all that bacon grease like they were designed for it. Some folks even added cheese or a splash of sour cream if they were feeling fancy. You always found a stack of these foil packets hidden on the grill at 4th of July parties or neighborhood potlucks, right next to the burgers and hot dogs. But now, they have pretty much vanished, like most of the clever grilling hacks our grandparents relied on. You walk past a modern grill and it is all flashy tools and gadgets, but no foil packets in sight. Makes you wonder why we ever let this one go. Barbecue bologna. Steaks might sound like a joke, but for a lot of families, they were a summer tradition you could smell from 3 houses down. Thick slices of bologna grilled just like a steak, char marks and all, were a staple at backyard cookouts, especially when money was tight and real steak was out of the question. You would slap those slices on the grill, give them a good char, and brush them with whatever barbecue sauce you had on hand. The result? Smoky, salty, and surprisingly satisfying. Bologna was cheap, easy to store, and practically indestructible, which made it perfect for feeding a crowd. Kids loved the novelty of it. Adults loved stretching the grocery budget, and everyone went home full. You would find these at neighborhood barbecues, park cookouts, and family reunions across the United States. But somewhere along the way, bologna lost its charm and disappeared from our grills. Now it feels like nobody remembers this backyard classic, even though it kept plenty of bellies happy back when steaks were more dream than dinner. Grilled hot dog and cheese skewers were basically a genius mashup of childhood favorites and grown-up grilling flair. Imagine threading thick chunks of hot dogs and cubes of cheddar onto wooden skewers, tossing them on the grill and watching the cheese melt just enough to get gooey while the hot dogs crisped up. It was simple, satisfying, and somehow felt a little fancier than your average grilled frankfurter. These skewers showed up at backyard cookouts, summer picnics, and school fundraisers during the 60s and 70s when families were all about stretching ingredients and making meals fun. They were especially popular with kids who loved anything on a stick, and parents loved how quick and easy they were to whip up. They filled that sweet spot between snack and meal, perfect for eating with your hands and running back to the lawn games. But you hardly ever see them today, even though they were the go-to backyard crowd pleaser for decades. Kinda makes you wonder why we traded melty cheese and crispy hot dogs for plain old store-bought sliders. Brown sugar barbecue meatloaf on the grill was a thing of pure backyard brilliance, before meatloaf got confined to casseroles and sad weeknight dinners. Back in the 70s and 80s, families would shape their meatloaf mixture, slap it onto a grill-safe pan, and let the smoke work its magic. But the real star was the brown sugar barbecue glaze that caramelized on top, turning a humble loaf into something smoky, sweet, and completely worth bragging about. It was cheaper than burgers for a crowd, stretched ground beef farther, and brought a little Sunday dinner energy to casual summer cookouts. You could feed half the neighborhood with one meatloaf and still have leftovers for sandwiches. Plus, everyone had their secret ingredient. Some threw in breadcrumbs, others snuck in oats. But that sticky, sugary glaze was the non-negotiable. It kept the meat moist, added a perfect crisp, and made the grill smell downright heavenly. These days, you hardly ever see meatloaf at a barbecue, let alone one with that rich brown sugar crust. Which is a real shame because few things hit like grilled meatloaf done right. Grilled bologna and pineapple sandwiches were basically the rebellious cousin of your average backyard burger. Sweet pineapple rings sizzling on the grill, bologna slices getting those perfect char marks, and a toasted bun pulling it all together. It was weird, bold, and people loved every bite of it. Back in the 60s and 70s, this sweet and salty sandwich combo was all the rage at summer cookouts. Pineapple had gone mainstream thanks to the tiki craze, and bologna was still holding strong as the budget-friendly protein of choice. Put them together, toss them on the grill, and suddenly your backyard barbecue had a little tropical flair. Families loved how easy they were, especially when feeding a crowd without draining the grocery budget. And let's be honest, grilling pineapple is still one of life's underrated pleasures. But somewhere along the way, these sandwiches vanished from summer menus, leaving behind nothing but memories of smoky, sweet, slightly strange perfection. Corn on the cob with mayonnaise and Parmesan feels like one of those fancy street foods today. But decades ago, it was just another trick your family pulled out at summer cookouts. Before elote hit restaurant menus and food trucks, families were brushing grilled corn with mayonnaise, sprinkling it with grated Parmesan, and adding a pinch of chili powder or paprika if they were feeling bold. It sounds simple now, but back then, it felt like gourmet grilling right in your backyard. The mayo melted into the hot corn, the cheese clung to every kernel, and the smoky grill flavor pulled it all together. It was quick, cheap, and made plain old corn feel like a celebration. This was a cookout favorite that showed up everywhere from small-town potlucks to beachside barbecues in the 70s and 80s. But somehow, over time, it disappeared from backyard menus. Maybe people got stuck on plain butter and salt, but this cheesy, creamy classic deserves a real comeback. Honey-glazed grilled Spam burgers were proof that even humble ingredients could shine with a little backyard ingenuity. Spam was still riding high in post-war America, and families were not shy about slicing it thick, tossing it on the grill, and brushing it with honey for that perfect salty sweet finish. These burgers were budget-friendly, easy to make, and surprisingly delicious. The grill added that smoky char, the honey caramelized on top, and suddenly you had a sandwich that felt a lot fancier than its price tag. You would see them at park cookouts, summer picnics, and neighborhood potlucks, often sandwiched between toasted buns with lettuce and maybe a little mustard if you were lucky. Spam might get a bad rap today, but back then, it was practically a grilling essential for families who knew how to stretch $1 and still enjoy the weekend. Somewhere along the way, the honey-glazed Spam burger fell off the map, replaced by flashier, pricier options. But anyone who remembers biting into one of these knows it deserves a second chance on the grill. Hot dog stuffed grilled bell peppers were one of those quirky cookout ideas that somehow worked better than they had any right to. Picture halved bell peppers filled with chopped hot dogs, shredded cheese, relish, and maybe a little mustard, grilled until the peppers were tender and everything inside got warm and melty. It was part side dish, part main course, and all nostalgic backyard magic. This recipe showed up at family barbecues and neighborhood block parties, especially during the 70s and 80s when people loved turning simple ingredients into crowd pleasers. Peppers were cheap, hot dogs were everywhere, and cheese made it all feel extra special. Plus, stuffing veggies with other cookout favorites meant you could stretch your grocery haul farther without sacrificing flavor. Somewhere along the line, though, these stuffed peppers disappeared from the summer grill scene, replaced by more polished, less fun recipes. But anyone who remembers them knows they were the sneaky star of the picnic table, cheesy, smoky, and weirdly satisfying. Teriyaki chicken kebabs with maraschino cherries were pure backyard kitsch, and that was exactly the point. Imagine chunks of chicken, juicy pineapple, bright red maraschino cherries, and bell peppers all skewered together, brushed with sweet teriyaki glaze, and grilled to sticky caramelized perfection. It was like bringing the tiki party trend straight to your backyard. These kebabs exploded in popularity during the 60s and 70s when families were all about trying new flavors and putting a playful spin on traditional cookout food. The cherries added a pop of color, the pineapple brought sweetness, and the chicken soaked up all that teriyaki goodness. It was fun, festive, and surprisingly budget-friendly, making it a favorite for summer parties, beachside barbecues, and park picnics. But somewhere along the way, maraschino cherries got labeled as kitschy, and these kebabs quietly vanished from cookout menus, which is a shame because few things look as cheerful on the grill as chicken, pineapple, and bright red cherries sizzling away together. Grilled bologna roll-ups with cream cheese filling were the backyard cookout snack that proved even the weirdest ideas sometimes just worked. You would take slices of bologna, spread them with cream cheese, roll them up tight, and skewer them before tossing them on the grill. The edges got crispy, the cream cheese melted just enough, and suddenly you had a salty, smoky, creamy little appetizer that kept people coming back for more. It might sound strange now, but back in the 60s and 70s, this was a cookout staple. Quirky, easy, and surprisingly satisfying. Bologna was cheap, cream cheese felt fancy, and grilling made everything taste better. You would spot these at block parties, church picnics, and family reunions, usually right next to the deviled eggs and potato salad. Somewhere along the way, though, these little roll-ups disappeared, probably falling victim to fancier appetizers and trendier menus. But anyone who remembers the magic of that crispy bologna and melted cream cheese knows these deserve a comeback, even if they sound a little funny today. Barbecue potato chip burgers were the kind of summer meal that only made sense once you took the first bite. It was not enough to just toss a burger on the grill. Families in the 70s took things a step further by crushing barbecue-flavored potato chips right on top of their burgers. The chips added a smoky, salty crunch that gave your average burger a whole new personality. It was the perfect marriage of snack food and backyard classic, and everyone wanted a bite. You would see them at neighborhood barbecues, little league fundraisers, and beach cookouts, basically anywhere families were stretching their grocery budget and still trying to impress the crowd. Chips were cheap, burgers were filling, and throwing them together was pure cookout creativity. Somewhere along the way, though, this crunchy burger disappeared, replaced by gourmet toppings and complicated recipes. But there is something about barbecue chip crumbs on a juicy burger that feels like peak summer nostalgia. It might be messy, but it sure makes you wonder why we stopped making them. Apple butter glazed pork chops were summer's sneaky answer to making dinner feel a little fancier without breaking the bank. Picture thick pork chops sizzling on the grill, brushed generously with sticky apple butter until they caramelized to sweet, smoky perfection. It was simple, affordable, and made your backyard feel like a five-star picnic. Back in the 60s and 70s, apple butter was not just for toast. It was a sneaky ingredient that families used to bring some sweetness to savory dishes, especially at cookouts. You would find these pork chops next to foil-wrapped potatoes, paper plates stacked high, and that one relative who always hovered near the grill. The apple butter gave the pork a rich, glossy finish, making it look more impressive than it probably was. But somewhere over the years, people forgot about this little backyard gem, and the trend quietly disappeared. You hardly see apple butter at the grill anymore, even though it made pork chops taste like summer's greatest secret. Mustard-glazed grilled sausages were the unsung heroes of the neighborhood cookout, showing up when families wanted big flavor without overthinking dinner. You would grab a few links of sausage, brush them with tangy yellow mustard or spicy brown mustard, toss them on the grill, and let the magic happen. The mustard created a golden, smoky glaze that crisped up perfectly over the heat, adding just enough bite to balance the rich, juicy sausage. It was a backyard tradition that hit its peak in the 70s, when cookouts were all about feeding crowds on the cheap. You would find these sizzling away next to burgers, hot dogs, and those foil-wrapped potatoes everyone forgot about until they were steaming and ready. Parents loved how quick and affordable they were, and kids loved the bold, zippy flavor. But today, mustard glazed sausages have quietly disappeared, replaced by plain hot dogs or fancier brats. It is a little sad, considering how much flavor these brought to the grill and how easy they were to pull off. Grilled bologna and cheese melts on Texas toast were the kind of summer cookout food that felt fancy, even though everyone knew it was just dressed-up pantry staples. You would take thick slices of Texas toast, pile on bologna and plenty of cheese, and toss the whole thing on the grill until it turned golden, bubbly, and melty. It was smoky, crispy, cheesy comfort food that somehow belonged at every backyard party. Back in the 60s and 70s, this was a cookout staple, especially when families were stretching budgets but still wanted a meal that looked impressive. Bologna was affordable, cheese made everything better, and Texas toast gave it that hearty diner-style vibe people loved. These open-faced melts were easy to whip up for a crowd, perfect for stacking on paper plates next to potato salad and chips. But somewhere along the line, bologna fell out of favor, and these cheesy grilled melts quietly disappeared from summer menus. Which is a shame, because nothing hits like melty cheese and smoky bologna on buttery Texas toast. Cherry cola-glazed chicken drumsticks were backyard barbecue brilliance, combining the best of dinner and dessert in one sticky, smoky bite. You would take juicy chicken drumsticks, baste them with sweet cherry cola glaze, and let them sizzle on the grill until they caramelized to shiny, syrupy perfection. It might sound wild now, but back in the 70s, cola-glazed everything was the height of cookout creativity. The soda added sweetness, the grill gave it a charred edge, and families loved how easy it was to pull off with pantry staples. These drumsticks showed up at summer parties, church potlucks, and those block-wide barbecues where every neighbor chipped in. Parents appreciated the simple ingredients, kids loved the sticky, candy-like glaze, and everyone went home with sauce on their fingers. But somewhere over the years, cherry cola chicken vanished, replaced by store-bought sauces and complicated marinades. It is easy to forget how creative backyard cooking used to be, but one bite of these drumsticks brings it all back. Foil-wrapped burger pouches with mushrooms and onions were a low-maintenance grilling hack that felt like you discovered a backyard cheat code. You would shape your burger patties, load them into foil with sliced mushrooms, onions, maybe a slice of cheese, and seal it all tight before tossing it on the grill. No flipping, no mess, no burgers falling apart. The foil handled everything, steaming the veggies and keeping the patties juicy. Families in the 60s and 70s loved this trick, especially at big cookouts where juggling 10 things on the grill was guaranteed chaos. The mushrooms soaked up smoky flavor, the onions caramelized just right, and your burger came out cooked to perfection every time. Plus, cleanup was a breeze, which made parents even happier. You would spot these foil-wrapped pouches stacked on picnic tables next to chips and pasta salad, a little backyard secret that always delivered. But these days, they have quietly disappeared from summer barbecues, replaced by trendier, more complicated meals. Funny how the simplest tricks often get left behind. Grilled bologna sliders with sweet pickle relish were the bite-sized snack that turned backyard cookouts into neighborhood block parties. You would slice bologna thick, grill it until crispy around the edges, slap it on little slider buns, and top it with sweet pickle relish for the perfect tangy, salty, smoky combo. It was cheap, easy, and felt way fancier than your typical hot dog situation. Back in the 70s, this was the ultimate party food, affordable, crowd-friendly, and quirky enough to make people smile. You would see trays of these sliders disappearing fast at summer picnics, pool parties, and late afternoon barbecues when everyone wanted a snack but was saving room for dessert. Families loved how quickly they came together, and bologna was practically a budget hero back then. But somewhere along the way, these little sliders vanished from cookouts, replaced by trendier finger foods and complicated appetizers. It is easy to forget that sometimes all you need is smoky bologna, a soft bun, and a dollop of relish to bring back those summer backyard vibes. Barbecue butter cornbread on the grill was one of those sneaky summer sides that reminded everyone you did not need an oven to make something unforgettable. Picture cornbread batter poured into a cast iron skillet, set right on the grill and slathered with smoky barbecue butter until the edges crisped up golden and perfect. It was sweet, savory, and made your whole backyard smell like the county fair. Families in the 60s and 70s knew this trick well. It stretched a meal, made use of pantry staples, and kept the kitchen cool during blazing summer afternoons. The grill gave the cornbread a crispy bottom, the barbecue butter soaked into every crumb, and suddenly the side dish was the main attraction. You would find this at cookouts, beach bonfires, and block parties when people wanted something hearty but simple. But these days, grilled cornbread has quietly disappeared, replaced by store-bought rolls or forgettable buns. Which is a shame, because few things hit like cornbread crisped up over an open flame. Citrus-marinated pork skewers with peppers were the bright, zesty burst of flavor your backyard cookout did not know it needed. You would marinate chunks of pork in orange juice, lemon zest, and garlic, thread them onto skewers with bell peppers, and grill them until everything was caramelized and juicy. It was simple, budget-friendly, and packed a flavor punch that felt fancy without all the work. Back in the 70s, these skewers were everywhere. Beach picnics, block parties, even late-night bonfires, when families were exploring new flavors and stretching grocery budgets. The citrus marinade kept the pork tender, the peppers added color, and the whole thing cooked up fast, perfect for feeding a hungry crowd. It was a little tropical, a little savory, and completely satisfying. But over time, these bright citrus skewers disappeared from summer menus, replaced by fancier kebabs or complicated marinades. It is easy to forget how good grilled pork can be when you add a splash of orange and lemon, but one bite of these, and the backyard memories come rushing back. Grilled bologna and pineapple pizza slices were the kind of quirky cookout food that made people stop and stare, and then grab a slice. Back in the 70s, families were all about throwing bold, weird combos on the grill, and this one hit all the marks. You would start with pizza slices, yes, the real deal, layer on grilled pineapple, thick bologna, maybe some extra cheese if you were lucky, and let it all sizzle on the grill. The cheese bubbled, the edges crisped up, and suddenly pizza night became backyard barbecue magic. It was part of that whole tiki-inspired anything-goes era of cookouts, when pineapple showed up on everything from burgers to kebabs. These pizza slices disappeared over time, replaced by fancier flatbreads and trendy grill recipes. But anyone who remembers biting into smoky, cheesy, pineapple-topped pizza fresh off the grill knows it was summer weirdness at its absolute best. Sour cream and onion grilled potato skins were one of those sneaky good party snacks that disappeared before people even realized they were gone. You would scoop out baked potato halves, grill them until crispy, and load them up with sour cream and chopped green onions. It was salty, creamy, and crispy all at once, the ultimate backyard crowd pleaser. Families in the 60s and 70s loved these because they turned leftover potatoes into something new without wasting a thing. They were cheap, easy to prep ahead, and perfect for cookouts when people wanted a snack that felt fancier than plain old chips. Plus, tossing them on the grill gave them that smoky char everyone loved. These days, you hardly ever see grilled potato skins at summer barbecues, replaced by flashier appetizers that take twice the effort. But nothing hits like crispy potatoes, cool sour cream, and a little smoky flavor straight off the grill. Grilled bologna steaks with spicy mustard glaze were one of those summertime meals that proved you did not need expensive cuts of meat to feel like a grill master. Thick bologna slices slapped on the grill, brushed with spicy mustard glaze, and cooked until the edges crisped up and bubbled. Now that was backyard cooking at its thriftiest best. Back in the 70s, this was a staple at family barbecues and block parties when groceries were tight, but people still wanted big, bold flavor. Bologna was affordable, mustard gave it a tangy kick, and tossing it on the grill made it feel way fancier than it was. You would see these stacked on paper plates next to chips, beans, and maybe a pickle spear if you were lucky. Somewhere along the way, though, grilled bologna lost its place at the cookout, replaced by trendier meats and complicated marinades. But this smoky, spicy classic still deserves a spot on the grill because nothing says summer like bologna with a little backyard char. Barbecue ranch chicken foil packets were basically the cookout version of a one-pot wonder, except everything cooked right inside a foil pouch on the grill. You would toss chicken breasts in ranch dressing and barbecue sauce, seal them up with some veggies, and let the heat do its thing. The ranch kept the chicken juicy, the sauce caramelized just right, and the foil made cleanup a breeze. Families in the 80s loved these because they were easy, mess-free, and perfect for feeding a crowd at summer barbecues. You could prep them ahead, stack them on the grill, and still have time to kick back with a lemonade. But these foil packets quietly disappeared as backyard menus got more complicated and fancy. Funny how the easiest, tastiest tricks tend to vanish when no one is paying attention. Grilled bologna and pineapple kebabs with cherry garnish were the kind of fun, over-the-top cookout food that could only have come from a tiki-obsessed America. Families would skewer bologna slices, pineapple chunks, and bright red maraschino cherries, then toss the whole thing on the grill until everything caramelized and sizzled. It was weird, sweet, salty, and smoky. And for some reason, it completely worked. Back in the 60s and 70s, this was a backyard party favorite when families wanted to stretch the grocery budget but still serve something that looked festive. The cherries added a pop of color, the pineapple brought sweetness, and the smoky bologna tied it all together. You would spot trays of these at summer barbecues, pool parties, and potlucks before they quietly vanished from the grill scene. But anyone who remembers that sweet and smoky combo knows these kebabs deserve a comeback. Old-fashioned buttered grilled hot dog buns were one of those tiny cookout details that made a big difference, even if nobody talked about it. Instead of tossing plain buns straight from the bag onto a plate, families would brush them with melted butter and let them toast on the grill until golden brown and crispy. It was simple, budget-friendly, and instantly made every hot dog taste better. The outside crisped up, the inside stayed soft, and suddenly your cookout felt a little more special without much effort. Back in the 60s and 70s, this was a backyard staple, easy enough for kids to help with, tasty enough to keep everyone happy. But somewhere along the way, buttered buns got replaced by plain, forgettable bread straight from the package. Funny how we stopped doing the little things that made cookouts feel like an occasion. Molasses glazed pork ribs were sticky, smoky, and practically the definition of old-school summer grilling. You would slow cook pork ribs on the grill, brushing them with molasses glaze until they turned shiny, sweet, and charred just right around the edges. It was messy, delicious, and totally worth every sticky finger. Families in the 60s and 70s loved this recipe because it stretched cheaper cuts of pork into something special without spending a fortune. Molasses added rich sweetness, the grill gave it smoky flavor, and suddenly your backyard smelled like the best roadside barbecue joint around. But as time went on, these old-school ribs quietly disappeared, replaced by trendy rubs and complicated sauces. It is easy to forget how simple, sweet molasses turned basic ribs into a backyard masterpiece. Tangy pickle-brined grilled chicken breasts were the sneaky summer secret to making juicy, flavorful chicken with barely any work. You would soak the chicken in leftover pickle juice, toss it on the grill, and end up with tender, tangy, smoky perfection. It sounds odd, but back in the 70s and 80s, this was a backyard trick that families swore by. The brine kept the chicken juicy, added a bright punch of flavor, and saved money by stretching every grocery store purchase to the max. You would see this chicken served at park picnics, family reunions, and neighborhood barbecues when people wanted big flavor without fancy marinades. But somewhere along the way, pickle-brined chicken disappeared, replaced by store-bought sauces and overcomplicated recipes. Funny how we forgot the easy tricks that made summer grilling so good. Cheddar and bacon. Stuffed grilled onions were proof that cookout food could be both thrifty and downright indulgent. You would hollow out whole onions, Stuff them with shredded cheddar and crispy bacon, wrap them in foil, and let them cook on the grill until the cheese melted and the onions turned buttery soft. It was smoky, cheesy, and rich, a little backyard gem that turned basic ingredients into something unforgettable. Families loved these during the 70s when stretching the grocery budget meant getting creative. Onions were cheap, cheese and bacon made everything better, and tossing them on the grill felt like magic. But these cheesy, stuffed onions disappeared from summer menus as backyard cooking got fancier and more complicated. It is easy to forget how good smoky onions and melty cheddar can be, until you take that first bite. Honey mustard, glazed bologna. Sandwiches on the grill were the bold, sweet, tangy upgrade that turned simple backyard lunches into cookout gold. You would brush thick slices of bologna with honey mustard, slap them on the grill, and toast the buns until everything was hot, crispy, and dripping with flavor. It was salty, sweet, smoky, and ridiculously satisfying. Back in the 70s, this was a backyard staple when families wanted big flavor on a small budget. Bologna was cheap, honey mustard gave it flair, and grilling pulled it all together. You would see these sandwiches served at beach parties, block barbecues, and lazy Sunday cookouts before they quietly disappeared from summer menus. But one bite of that sweet, smoky, tangy bologna reminds you why this forgotten sandwich deserves a comeback. Stuffed green peppers with rice and corn were a humble summer dish that did not need anything extra to feel like a full meal. Peppers were halved, seeded, and filled with cooked rice, corn, chopped onions, and sometimes tomato sauce. Everything was spooned in and baked until the peppers softened, then topped with a little cheese if available. It made you feel full without being heavy. In farm communities and suburbs, peppers were easy to grow or buy cheap from roadside stands. That made them a go-to when money was tight, but hunger was not. The corn and rice stretched the filling. You could feed 6 with just a few peppers and a pan of rice. Some added beans or leftover meat, but many made the vegetarian version just fine. It was colorful. It was fragrant. It sat proudly on the table like it had something to prove. And for many summers it did. You can't go wrong with apples, not even with root beer floats. Root beer floats are an oddly satisfying drink and summertime refresher. This classic treat is a combination of creamy vanilla ice cream and fizzy root beer. Root beer floats have been a favorite since the early 20th century, but they really soared in popularity during the 1970s. Frank J. Wisner, owner of Colorado's Cripple Creek Brewing, is credited with creating the first root beer float on August 19, 1893. Since then, the drink has been featured in advertisements, and an entire day has been dedicated to celebrating it. Every August to 6, people gather up some root beer and ice cream and mix up the perfect root beer float, the combination of the cold, creamy ice cream with a refreshing experience. With baked nectarine chicken salad, you had two things, a few aspects that were really important and simple. These parts of the dish were crucial if you wanted to nail it right. The baked chicken, for example, was a really touch-and-go situation. It was so easy for people to over-season it or under-season it, which would often lead to chicken that didn't sit well with the nectarines. Mostly people would use chicken breasts and thighs so that their flavors could bounce off of everything else while the meat itself would be soft and chewable. This was only boosted by the fact that it was marinated and then rubbed in a lot of herb mixes built to work with nectarines. The fruit themselves have a pretty natural sweetness to them that gives them a unique texture. If you bake them, they sort of soften, and that gives them an entirely new layer of texture and flavor. The nuts and cheese, plus the dressing, are small side elements, but they take a lot of attention to detail to shine. You want to toast the almonds just until they're slightly crunchy, and no more. Goat cheese works best here, or blue cheese if you can't find any. The dressing, a light vinaigrette, is probably the most important part. This is what will decide whether all these otherwise conflicting ingredients come together. It's a funny world, isn't it? A spaghetti pie casserole is somehow easier to make than a simple baked chicken salad. But well, that's the level of skill the recipe wants out of you. The Hungarians really killed it with dinners that shaped our childhood, because we've got another banger on the list. Hungarian goulash was everyone's favorite cozy hearty meal back in the day. Goulash is a hearty stew whipped up with tender chunks of beef simmered in a rich, savory sauce brimming with paprika. Yeah, paprika was huge back in the day. So why did this delicious dinner vanish from our dinner tables? Well, the Hungarian goulash traces back as far as the 10th century to stews eaten by the shepherds, so you can say this one might just have run its course. But hey, if you're ever craving goulash, dust off some old cookbooks and get to work because it really isn't hard to wump up. This is the perfect dish for a chilly night in, curled up on the couch with a good movie. Just be careful not to spill it on your mom's vintage tablecloth. Those things are irreplaceable. One of the most popular things that people would ever eat back in the day was bread with meat drippings. Despite what you might think, this is really just stale bread with leftover drippings that were squeezed out. People weren't fond of letting the drippings go to waste back then. They could be used as a cooking fat, as a dip, or as a coating to increase flavor. Poor people would generally try their best to keep a steady supply of them. This was also one of the most popular meals to come out of the Great Depression because of how economical it was. It also luckily worked better with bran and rye bread instead of the fluffy, white wheat flour one we're used to. That meant that the dish was able to hit a bigger audience because a lot of people were barred from ever being able to buy fluffy white flour-based bread. These were okay, really. Just an average breakfast to get you started, but they were wonderful at stretching out the pantry and making sure things stay for as long as possible. Also, if there's ever something you need toast for, but you're just out of butter, syrup, or whatever, this is a pretty okay alternative. Cold macaroni ring with tuna and peas was one of those make-ahead meals that looked like a party but tasted like pantry staples. It started with elbow macaroni, cooked and cooled, then tossed with mayonnaise, canned tuna, peas, chopped celery, and a touch of lemon juice. The whole mixture was packed into a ring mold and chilled for hours until it held its shape. Come dinner time, you flipped it out onto a plate and maybe garnished it with parsley or extra peas. This was dinner, not a side dish, and certainly not just for potlucks. It showed up in homemaker cookbooks throughout the 1950s and 1960s as a cool supper for hot days when no one wanted to turn on the stove. The peas gave it color. The tuna gave it protein. The macaroni made it stick to your ribs. You would slice it like a cake and serve it with iced tea and saltines. It was pretty in its own quiet way, and somehow it always worked. Some people added pimentos or chopped olives for flair. Others kept it plain and reliable. It is easy to laugh at a tuna ring now, but back then it was a little miracle of convenience and charm. Now let's toast to another forgotten favorite from the 1970s. The Welsh rarebit. Welsh rarebit is a British-inspired dish that starts with a cheese sauce made from sharp cheddar, beer, mustard, and a dash of Worcestershire sauce, all melted together until smooth. It dates back to 18th century Britain, where it was initially called Welsh rabbit, even though it has nothing to do with rabbits. By the 1970s, it had become a cozy common meal in many American homes, often served for lunch or as a hearty snack. Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney even spotlighted rarebit in their cookbook, which was made to accompany the Hulu series Welcome to Wrexham. It seems Welsh rarebit is making a comeback, and I'm here for it, but I also want crescent rings on my dinner table again. Spaghetti pie casserole is probably one of the first instances we have of fusion food overtaking common American interests. While it doesn't really have a well-documented starting point in history like some other burgers and loaves do, it is pretty interesting to see the kind of pipeline this place has taken. The casserole craze in the middle of the 20th century reflected the broader interest of Americans dipping their toes into foreign cuisines, especially whatever the French and Italians had cooked up. Something about their kitchens was irresistible to most people. People seem to believe that this dish got its inspiration from lasagna and baked ziti, which I can't lie makes sense. Both of those have been a big part of Italian-American culture for ages now, and spaghetti, despite not being typical in Italy, has become a really popular choice for American homes. A spaghetti pie itself was purely a home chef classic, though, and it was thanks to how available processed ingredients were becoming. Now that you could just buy pre-made crusts and spaghetti packets, a lot of the work that people associated with it before just went up in the air. You may not believe this, but it was actually easy to prepare for this. Back in the 1950s, the Divan Parisian restaurant at Chatham Hotel in New York City gave birth to its signature dish, the chicken divan casserole. This mouth-watering dish soon found its way to all our homes, and I'm not complaining. It's made of tender chicken pieces nestled amongst vibrant green broccoli florets in a rich and creamy sauce, topped with a generous layer of melty cheese and a sprinkle of crispy breadcrumbs. The chef who leaked this recipe out to the public really took one for the team, and we can never thank him enough. It's the perfect combination of protein, veggies, and all the cheesy goodness your heart desires. Just maybe pair it with a side salad to pretend you're being healthy. Chicken divan casserole is the retro dish of every cheese lover's dreams, and you know what that calls for? A comeback. It's a classic at throwback parties, but you don't really need an excuse to cook this up. A typical Tuesday night works too. Ketchup sandwiches are also in the same vein of, I don't really have anything else here. It's definitely some bare bones cooking, but when you're down on your luck financially, it's not really the time to be picky. Ketchup sandwiches were usually made with brown bread because whatever white bread you could buy, you could also just get a lot more like potatoes, root vegetables, and onions instead. Those things could be made into soups and stews, so there were very few disadvantaged people actively relying on white bread. Ketchup was also fairly different in the 20th century than it is here. It felt more natural, it had a stronger tomato flavor, and it was a lot cheaper. A bottle of Heinz doesn't cost anything but a few cents. What people would do is sometimes take the meat drippings idea and mix it in with these ketchup sandwiches. They would spread the drippings on the bread or use it as a dip. And if nothing else, it definitely added some more interesting qualities to otherwise usually stale bread. Ham and banana casserole is one of those recipes that makes you stop and read the page twice. But once upon a time, this odd couple was a regular guest at summer dinners across suburban America. It started with slices of ham wrapped around whole bananas, arranged in a casserole dish and baked with mustard sauce poured over the top. The mustard added a tangy kick, and the bananas softened into the kind of texture that people back then thought of as fancy. Some even added shredded cheddar cheese. It was quirky, no doubt about it. But in the 1950s and 1960s, cookbooks were full of strange pairings that somehow worked. This dish was a crowd pleaser for its novelty as much as its taste. And in hot weather, it was easy to make without much fuss. It showed up at church potlucks, birthday parties, and even weeknight dinners when the fridge was running low. Today, people may cringe at the combo, but for families back then, it was just another way to stretch meat and fruit into a full meal. It is the kind of thing you might laugh at now, but remember fondly if you grew up scraping mustard sauce off your plate. Now that we're talking about salads, Spam salads come to mind. Spam salad features chunks of Spam, the canned meat product that became a household name, mixed with a variety of fresh and pantry ingredients. To prepare it, dice Spam into bite-sized pieces and combine with chopped celery, pickles, hard-boiled eggs, and a creamy mayo-based dressing. Mix everything until well-coated and chill before serving for the best flavor. Spam salad became popular for being so easy to prepare. Who remembers the slogan, "Sizzle pork and Spam salad was a staple at picnics and potlucks, where it stood out for its unique combination. Some versions included peas or macaroni, making it even yummier. The salty Spam paired with the crunchy vegetables and creamy dressing created a divine dinner experience. It was not only delicious, but also an economical choice for middle-class families. This dish was a true representation of the 1970s trend of convenience foods. Would you love to try this again? I would. Oxtail stew has a pretty celebrated and deep history, and I really want to take you through all of it. Globally, it's always been at the forefront of African, Caribbean, and Nigerian cultures. Oxtail itself refers to the tail of the cattle, which was one of the cheapest kinds of meat you could buy. It was typically always used for stews because of the amount of collagen in it. You'd slow cook this bad boy for hours until you got a dish that was literally bursting with flavor. Caribbean and West African cooking both have different takes on it that they've introduced into the wider scope of American food. Basically, during the Great Migration around the 20th century, lots of Africans started coming to bustling cities with traffic and waves of immigrants. That, of course, meant that there were loads of people who had to be cooked for now, and oxtail stew was a dish that understood that assignment better than anything else. It became extremely common for people to bring oxtail stew to the family potluck in the 1950s and even further, especially as it became a big part of soul food and Southern culture. Even today, it's a pretty well-known part of African American culture in America, and you'd be pretty hard-pressed to find someone who hasn't tried it. The tasty meat pie isn't your average store-bought pie. We're talking about a savory masterpiece filled with delicious goodness. This used to be a classic at Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners back in the day before hash brown casseroles came to take the cake. But tasty meat pies had their own beauty. Imagine a flaky, golden brown crust with a filling of seasoned ground meat, chopped vegetables like carrots and peas, and a rich, flavorful gravy. The origins of the meat pie have been traced back to the Neolithic period, around 6000 BC. Yeah, even the Egyptians were a fan of this classic. It's perfect for a potluck, a family dinner, or even a cozy night in. The best part? Its portability. Just grab a slice and head out the door. It's the ultimate dinner on the go. Sliced tomato pie with biscuit crust was a midsummer miracle born from the garden and the oven. Tomatoes were the star. Big, juicy ones sliced thick and layered over a buttery biscuit dough pressed into a pie pan. Between the layers went onion, herbs, and sometimes cheddar or dollops of mayo, depending on the cookbook. Once baked, the tomatoes softened and sweetened, and the crust puffed up around the edges. The result was messy, fragrant, and comforting. This pie was not dessert, and it was not just a side, it was dinner. Served warm or room temperature, it filled the house with the smell of summer. Families used it to deal with too many tomatoes and a desire to skip meat. It was practical and indulgent. You could throw in corn or breadcrumbs. Some added a top crust, but most kept it open-faced. It faded when people stopped baking from scratch. But those who remember it will tell you it was magic. What do you say? We bring it back on this same flight with Tang pie? The name Tang should ring a bell, but if it doesn't, Tang is an iconic orange drink famously used by NASA on their trips to space. To prepare, mix Tang powder with sweetened condensed milk and whipped topping until smooth. Pour this creamy, orange-flavored filling into a graham cracker crust and chill until set. The result is a bright, tangy pie that's as refreshing as it is nostalgic. Tang pie was a hit during the 1970s, thanks to the popularity of Tang as a household staple. The pie's cheerful orange color and zesty flavor made it a standout at picnics. The recipe has been preserved through community cookbooks and heirloom recipe cards since the 1960s. Families loved its simple, no-bake recipe, which leaves a lasting impression on anyone who tried it. Gorgonzola-baked polenta is a curious little thing. It's something that's so inherently Italian you can't separate it from its roots, no matter how hard you try. It's made from peasant meals that really prioritized making recipes out of corn because it was one of the crops that was the easiest to grow. So you couldn't really take away its corn-based roots from it. Polenta was a key part of most of the diets of the first few waves of Italians that came on over to America. It's definitely evolved and lost its original essence a bit, but cornmeal is still a strong part of the dish. Gorgonzola, as intimidating as that sounds, is actually just a blue cheese that comes from Italy. It's something people make with cow's milk, and it has a really distinct texture compared to other cheeses. It's a part of what gives polenta its creamy, rich texture that makes it such a standout. Polenta traditionally was always made on the stove. In America, however, people started to bake it instead, and baked polenta was a bit different. They even switched up the cheeses, using Parmesan and mozzarella instead of Gorgonzola. Despite all these fundamental additions to the dish, people had no trouble telling that this was very clearly an Italian dish. The tasty meat pie isn't your average store-bought pie. We're talking about a savory masterpiece filled with delicious goodness. This used to be a classic at Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners back in the day before hash brown casseroles came to take the cake. But tasty meat pies had their own beauty. Imagine a flaky golden brown crust with a filling of seasoned ground meat, chopped vegetables like carrots and peas, and a rich, flavorful gravy. The origins of the meat pie have been traced back to the Neolithic period around 6000 BC. Yeah, even the Egyptians were a fan of this classic. It's perfect for a potluck, a family dinner, or even a cozy night in. The best part? Its portability. Just grab a slice and head out the door. It's the ultimate dinner on the go. Venison is one of the most common meats throughout all of history, so it's no surprise that the Native Americans have their own nutty take on it as well. In forests and grasslands, deer would usually thrive a lot more than what we're used to. There used to be, massive packs of them roaming around everywhere. Before the 20th century, also, the American chestnut tree was in its golden years. It was devastated later by regional hazards and blight. Chestnuts were something that were available all over eastern woodlands, so it was very easy to forage them and gather them for emergency situations. Venison was always a staple meat for all kinds of tribes, especially the Cherokee, Shawnee, and Algonquians. Deer was something that was respected by tribes for how much the animal would take care of them. It would give them hides for clothing, the sinew was used for tools, and the bones were used in medicinal broths and kept for trading or for hunting tools. The meat was also very flavorful and important for making pemmican, which was a superfood essential to the Native Americans. Venison was usually cut into cubes and put into a broth with roasted and peeled chestnuts. They would be fond of using Jerusalem artichokes, squash, and wild onions as well, so stock up on your root vegetables before trying this. Baked stuffed zucchini boats were the garden's way of saying dinner was ready. If you had zucchini growing out back, and most families did, you eventually ended up with more than you could use. That is where this recipe came in. You sliced the zucchini, scooped out the center, and stuffed it with breadcrumbs, sausage, herbs, onions, and a little cheese if you had it. Then it went into the oven until golden on top and tender underneath. The result was warm, filling, and surprisingly hearty for a dish with no meat front and center. This was not just about using produce, it was a centerpiece. In the 1960s and 1970s, garden cookbooks practically demanded this dish. It was meat-stretching, kid-pleasing, and oven-friendly. You could eat it warm or cold, toss in a tomato slice or two, and it became a full summer supper. Today it might pass as vegetarian rustic. Back then, it was just smart cooking. Corn chowder was a hit in the 1970s. This creamy dish combines fresh corn, potatoes, onions, and either milk or cream. With all this good stuff in one plate, you just know it tasted really good and we want it back. Corn chowder's roots can be traced back to New England, where it became a popular way to use up summer corn. It was the kind of meal you'll mostly find in Grandma's kitchen and was common in family dinners and community gatherings. Whether served as a starter or a main dish, corn chowder was satisfying. Historically, it was a staple in coastal communities where seafood variations were also popular. The dish is rich in vitamins and minerals, making it both delicious and nutritious. You see how great that looks? That's all the proof you need to make this popular again. Same with chicken pot pie. Chicken pot pie, the ultimate evening meal, warmed many hearts and bellies during the 1970s. This pie features a flaky crust filled with a rich mixture of chicken, vegetables, and creamy gravy. Chicken pot pie is prepared by cooking diced chicken with vegetables in a creamy broth, then baking it in a pastry-lined dish until golden brown. The pie has roots dating back to the early American settlers, but it made waves again in the 1970s as a family favorite. It was all over the ads, and KFC had theirs on everyone's face. Some of us loved the convenience of frozen versions, while homemade chicken pot pie was reserved for Sunday dinners. 3 stuffed cheese shells have a very long history in American cooking. They have an even more vibrant one in Italian cuisine and tradition, but at least the more important aspects of the cooking styles didn't get lost in translation. Ravioli, tortellini, and cannellini are still more or less exactly what you would use to make 3 stuffed cheese shells. Fun fact, the Italian word for this is conchiglione. If you can, try pronouncing that. Stuffed shells were pretty new territory even for them, though it wasn't always popular to have them. Italians themselves seem to think this dish was created thanks to Italian-American cuisine, which had slowly been taking on a shape of its own throughout the United States. Lots of big urban cities like New York, Philadelphia, and Chicago were the first places that immigrants and visitors would flock to. And naturally, with immigrants comes new culture. Lots of places promising authentic Italian food popped up on the busy streets of New York City, and they had a lot to show off. 3 cheese-stuffed shells was a recipe that was right at the front of all this. It made use of not just 3 different kinds of pasta, but also 3 different kinds of cheeses. You had Parmesan, ricotta, and mozzarella, which are pretty amazing combinations to work with when you stuff all of them together in a tiny, dense shell like that. Cabbage and noodles were one of the most affordable vegetable-based dishes you could get for yourself. The best thing about cabbages were the way they were available year-round, and let me just put things into perspective for you. Back then, the seasonal nature of things was something that was instrumental to how people planned out their budgets, their groceries, and what they were going to be eating that week. You may also think that without refrigeration, noodles wouldn't really be sustainable, but people would simply make the noodles from scratch when they needed it. Hard work, I know, but at least you didn't need a lot of the stuff. A simple head of cabbage, 1 bag of noodles that was enough to feed a family of up to 4 and 5, and it was an incredibly popular thing in cities. Though there may have been some cultural gaps in preferences. In the South, it never really caught on the same way. It's definitely quite a refreshing dish, though. If you really want to do something for a big flat-out feast, though, there's just nothing better than some Native American-style spit-roasted turkey. Turkey was a major source of protein and food for indigenous peoples in the eastern woodlands. They had been used to preparing and handling turkey for generations. They even had the cleaning process down to a science. Also, the feathers of the bird were used for clothing, for arrows, so that they would fly faster, and for rituals. I think they had some pretty good Thanksgiving ideas a long while before it even became a thing. If you wanted to recreate this today, you should ideally use a wild turkey, but even a domestic one works well. Also, smoked paprika and wild onions, plus the sage and thyme. I also suggest keeping it authentic and going with some bear fat or walnut oil if you can. You would need to set up a rotisserie spit over an open fire if you can. The end result is this deeply flavorful turkey that's got this wonderfully crispy exterior on the outside, but a smoky taste and tender feel on the inside. It's really just a delight for any kind of big gathering or party, and it's not a dish you want to be missing out on. Sumac lemonade was something that was known as sumac-ade, but it was actually just a citrus-esque beverage that had an incredible amount of tart to it. It was made from staghorn sumac, which was a plant that produced berries, and smooth sumac. For Native American tribes, these are 2 instrumental berries due to the way they function as both a nifty food source when fast-acting nutrition is required and a medicinal ingredient. Sumac berries were also something that ripened in the late summer, and they were always steeped deeply in water so that a refreshing, vitamin C-rich drink could be made. Lemons had not been introduced to the North American region yet, so sumac was the next best and closest thing. Still, it had a lot more uses than lemonade ever did. You could use sumac to even flavor different kinds of game and soups, which isn't something you usually hear too much about lemon. Sumac berries were actually harvested when they were deep red, dried, and fresh, and the cold water would help to get the tart flavor out without releasing the tannins that were there inside. The optional sweeteners, such as maple syrup and agave syrup, were really helpful in balancing that tartness out, but most people just had sumac lemonade as it was. They had to be steeped in the water for hours and strained thoroughly, though, which was definitely a lot of work. Corn fritter suppers were one of those magical meals that felt light but filled you up fast. Made from fresh corn cut off the cob, mixed with flour, eggs, and a splash of milk, these fritters were dropped into hot oil until golden brown and crisp. You would pile them high on a plate, sometimes dusted with salt or drizzled with syrup if the mood called for it. But the real trick was what came on the side. Thick tomato slices, chilled and sprinkled with pepper, or a scoop of cottage cheese gave the meal its balance. This was not a starter. This was dinner. A hot, crunchy, fresh off the skillet kind of dinner that made the house smell like summer. Cookbooks from the 1940s to the 1970s were packed with corn fritter recipes, each with its own little spin. Some added chives, some tossed in bits of bacon or green pepper. But they all revolved around one thing: making corn the star. If you had a garden or access to a roadside farm stand, corn fritters were an obvious choice. They were fast, easy, and cheap, and they made everyone at the table feel like they were eating something special. Remind me again why we stopped making these, and who says why scalloped potatoes were left in the past? This classic casserole is made with thinly sliced potatoes layered with a rich, velvety sauce made from milk, butter, and flour, often topped with a generous amount of shredded cheese. Scalloped potatoes have a long history, with variations of the dish appearing in American cookbooks as far back as the 19th century. By the 1970s, it had become a common meal at family gatherings, potlucks, and holiday feasts. The dish was often featured in advertisements and marketed as a one-skillet sensation. Just picture yourself scooping out a portion with the creamy, cheesy sauce and tender potatoes filling your mouth. That is a top-tier feeling, the same feeling I get when I eat Texas toast. If these smoky summer throwbacks made you hungry, drop your favorite in the comments, hit like, and subscribe for more forgotten cookout classics.